Luciano. So.
With the testimony you should give this court and jury, and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Kindly follow the officer to the stand.
Good morning, sir.
May I begin, Your Honor?
Mr. Hagan.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your first and last name for the record?
Of course, good morning, jury. My name is Officer Luciano Sereno Ayuso, Cirino Ayuso.
And what is your occupation, sir?
I'm currently employed with the Boston Police Department.
How long have you been a Boston police officer?
Going on 5 years now.
If you would, officer, for that 5-year span as a Boston police officer, would you describe what areas or units you've been assigned to?
I've been assigned to well over 7 or 8 units. I've been in B2, A1, E13, D4, and D14.
And officer, for those who don't understand the district determinations for the Boston Police Department, can you just tell us the areas that those different districts cover?
Of course, Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, Back Bay, Brighton, and downtown.
Officer, I'm calling your attention now to the summer of 2012, specifically July of 2012. What area or unit were you assigned to then?
I was a service unit here in downtown.
And that's area A1, downtown Boston?
Yes.
What shift did you work?
Last half's the midnight to 7.
How long had you been in area A1 at that time, as of July 15th, 2012?
I'd say at that time I was in A1 for about 4 to 5 months.
Officer, I'm calling your attention now to approximately 2:30 in the morning on Monday, July 16th, 2012. Were you working what you called the overnight or the first half shift that night, or last half?
Yes, I was working.
Morning watch, I think, is the name of the shift, right?
Last half.
Last half. And calling your attention now to just about 2:30 in the morning, did somebody approach you?
Yes, around 2:30 in the morning. I was patrolling the area of Tremont, and I was approached or waved down by a cab driver.
What area of Tremont were you patrolling?
I was patrolling the area around the hospitals.
And officer, I'm calling your attention now to the diagram to your left, which has been entered as exhibit number 4. Do you recognize that as a fair and accurate representation, an overhead map or satellite photograph of that area, including Tremont?
Yes.
In the area you were patrolling, sir, is it fair to state that that's the area where I'm circling here near the Tufts garage?
Yes.
When you were flagged down, were you flagged down by a particular person, sir?
Yes, I was flagged down by an individual. If I may look at my notes for this.
Yes, is your memory exhausted as to his name?
Yes, it is.
Well, let me ask you this, sir. Was it a cab driver who flagged you down?
Yes.
And after being flagged down by a cab driver, officer, did you follow the cab driver to a particular location?
After I was flagged down, the cab driver notified me of an incident taking place towards Shaman Ave, and I made my way over there.
In Shaman Ave, the area that has the red circle on Exhibit 4, is that the intersection of Shaman Ave and Herald Street?
Yes, it is.
Is that the area that you proceeded to, sir?
Yes.
About how long did it take you to get there from when the cab driver told you?
Seconds.
Seconds. Please describe, officer, if you would, for the jurors, what you observed as you came to that intersection.
As I pulled up to the intersection of Herald and Shama, I observed a motor vehicle with 4 doors open. At the time, the vehicle had its brake lights on. It appeared to be in a car accident. When I approached the vehicle, I observed 2 individuals to be unresponsive in the front passenger seat and the driver's seat, as well as the passenger seat. The passenger side area had glass strewn about on the floor.
Let me stop you for one moment, officer. I'm going to place on the screen what's been entered as exhibit number 6. Do you recognize that photograph, sir?
I do.
And is that the car that you observed when you got to the intersection of Harold Street and Shaman Avenue?
Yes, it is.
And you described that the doors were open and it appeared to be in an accident. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when you say it appeared to be in an accident, I'm just calling your attention to the what appears to be glass near the back driver's side door. Was that what you observed that led you to believe it may have been in an accident?
Yes.
Sustained. Please don't lead the witness.
What was it, sir, that made you believe the car had been in an accident?
I believe the car is an accident because of what I observed at the time. The broken, shattered glass on the floor was an indication of a possible accident.
Now, when you first pulled up, were you the first arriving Boston police officer or had other units arrived already?
I was the first Boston police officer on scene.
Other than the car that we see pictured in exhibit number 6, were there any other cars at the scene?
That I remember at the time, there was still vehicles within the right side of this vehicle.
That vehicles that had parked, passers-by,
Yes.
or stopped, I should say?
Right.
Now, you said the brake lights on the car were on, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you, what drew your first attention relative to people either in or outside of that car? What did you see first? Did you see anybody outside of the car, or did you first?
No, I didn't see anybody outside the car. When I approached the car, that's when I made observations of 2 individuals who appeared to be unresponsive.
Officer, had you approached on foot at that point, or were you still in your cruiser?
I left my cruiser and approached on foot.
When you approached the car, do you recall if you approached the driver's side or the passenger side?
I do not recall.
And when you looked into the car, just slowing you down from what you previously stated, what did you observe when you looked inside of the car?
When I looked inside the car, I observed 2 individuals, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side, both which appeared to be unresponsive. I tried to make contact with them, but I observed several wounds on them, which I notified Boston Police Dispatch as well as the supervisor immediately.
How did you try to make contact with them? What do you mean by that?
I tried to, I identified myself, Boston Police, sir, this is Boston Police, and I had no response.
Did they, and you said they were unresponsive, were they also apparently unconscious, at least as far as you could tell?
Yes, as far as I can tell.
Did you see any signs of life?
I did not.
You described some wounds on them. Do you recall generally what the wounds were that you observed?
Yes, one gentleman had a gunshot wound, an apparent gunshot wound to the chest, and the other one had an apparent gunshot wound to the head.
May I approach your witness, Ron?
You may.
So I'm going to show you 6 photographs. I'd ask you to look at them and tell me if you recognize what's depicted in the 6 photographs.
Okay.
And officer, is it fair to state that those 6 photographs are various angles of the car as you observed it on July 16th, year 2012 that you've just testified about?
Yes.
Your Honor, after these 6 photographs is the next number of exhibits.
Any objection?
No objections.
Without objection, exhibits, is that 10 through 15?
Yes, Your Honor.
Officer, I'm placing Exhibit 10 on the screen first. Does that show basically the view that you saw when you first arrived on scene, coming from the same direction as depicted in the photo?
Yes.
Exhibit 11, is that a view of the right side of the vehicle, the passenger side of the vehicle?
Yes.
Exhibit 12, is that a more close-up photograph of the same passenger side of the vehicle?
Yes.
Exhibit 13, is that a view of the front of the vehicle looking up Shawmut Avenue towards Tremont Street with crime scene tape up in front?
Yes.
Exhibit 15, is that a photograph of more close-up of the front of the car, again with the parts of the car being covered by sheets?
Yes.
Finally, Officer, Exhibit number 14, does that show the interior of the car with the two individuals inside who are covered by sheets?
Yes.
And again, recognizing that they are covered with sheets, was that the general positioning, though, of the two individuals you observed in the car?
Yes.
They were both seated in the upright position when you saw them?
Yes.
Now, Officer, calling your attention to what you just testified about, you indicated that you immediately got on the radio and notified somebody of what you observed. Is that correct?
Yes, notified Boston Police Dispatch.
And what did you notify them, essentially?
I notified them after I observed that the individuals were unresponsive. I notified dispatch of the initial wave down by the cab driver, as well as the fact that at this intersection I had two victims who appeared to be suffering from gunshot wounds, and I requested several units to assist me, as well as I informed dispatch to notify patrol supervisor.
Did you notify anybody to send Boston Health and Human Services or Boston EMS?
Yes.
And if you can estimate, sir, the best of your knowledge, how long did it take for other responding Boston police officers to arrive?
I'd say no more than 2 to 3 minutes.
What about ambulances? Did you see them arrive at some point?
I did at some point. I don't recall how long it took them.
Officer, what, if anything else, did you observe at the scene as far as any other injured parties or injured people other than the two individuals you saw inside of the car?
Towards the left hand of the vehicle, as I'm looking at it in this picture, towards the left hand of the vehicle.
Like this side here that I just made a mark?
Yes.
Okay.
I observed another individual, which his name escapes me at the time. He had a wound to his right arm and blood thrown about on his clothes.
And the injury to his right arm, could you tell what it looked like?
I believe at that time I got closer, and he informed me that he was shot. I saw a gunshot wound.
Was he bleeding at that point?
Yes.
And he was bleeding, you said, from the arm?
Yes.
Was there also blood on other parts of his body?
Yes, and his pants.
Was that his upper thigh region where there was blood?
Yes.
After seeing this individual, sir, what did you do relative to him, if anything?
I also notified dispatch, as well as I don't recall if at the time there was EMS on scene. If there was, I would have pointed him out to them.
What happened next, sir?
Afterwards, the patrol supervisor arrived on scene, and we established a crime scene, as well as we started identifying further witnesses to the incident that occurred.
When you say establish a crime scene, officer, can you describe for the jurors what that meant, at least to you?
Of course. In this situation, when we established the crime scene, one of the police officers that showed up, or the patrol supervisor, had crime scene tape. So we taped off the scene. That way, no further persons can get in or around the vehicle and disturb what had taken place.
Putting exhibit number 13 on the screen, officer, is that what you call or refer to as crime scene tape?
Yes.
And how quickly was the crime scene tape put up? Again, not indicating minutes, but just approximately how long it took to get the crime scene tape up.
I'd say around 5 to 10 minutes. when the patrol supervisor arrived.
And the crime scene tape, are you aware of whether or not it blocked vehicle traffic from continuing into the crime scene?
Well, the cruisers in the vehicle, behind the vehicle, served as its own perimeter, not allowing any vehicles coming down Shawmut.
I see. So on Exhibit 10, sorry to interrupt you, officer, the way we see the vehicles, the Boston police cruisers parked, were they essentially blocking the street at that point, closing it
Yes.
off? And to the best of your knowledge, officer, were civilians also kept outside of the crime scene once the perimeter was established and the crime scene tape was put up?
Yes.
And additionally, officer, you indicated that you assisted with witnesses or speaking to witnesses or securing witnesses. What exactly did you do in that regard, sir?
In that regards, I spoke to, I believe is one additional individual, the cab driver. Yes, I touched base with the cab driver in regards to what had occurred, and other officers on scene assisted with other witnesses that were on scene.
And to the best of your knowledge, officer, did you observe whether or not witnesses at that point were being kept in one particular location or secured in any way?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, they were.
And how long were you at that scene before you eventually were relieved, sir?
I would say I was at the scene for an hour or longer.
Did you eventually see at the scene the arrival of specialized Boston police units, including homicide detectives and crime scene response?
Yes.
Did you ever observe a search being conducted referred to as a line search?
Yes.
Describe what you observed in that regard, sir.
Line search, we were all directed to get in line by the patrol supervisor, and which all we did was get in line in a directed spot where the sergeant said, okay, we're going to start here. And we got online, I'd say on the bridge, and walked down. The reason being is to search for any evidence that might have escaped us in the original, when we first looked at the vehicle and the scene.
So, officer, you participated in the line search, is that correct?
Yes.
And just to further understand your testimony on this, you say that the bridge, although it's tough to tell from this photograph, I've placed Exhibit 10 on the screen, the area that I'm pointing to here, is that the bridge?
Yes, where the cruiser and the gray vehicle is.
What does the bridge go over, if you know?
I assume it goes over a roadway.
Is the Mass Pike underneath, if you know?
I don't know the name of it, I assume.
And showing you Exhibit number 13, does that show another angle of the bridge going upwards towards Tremont Street?
Yes, it does.
And the line search, officer, you indicated started at some point at the beginning of the bridge and ended on the other side of the bridge.
Yes.
What were you looking for in the line search, if you know?
I recall at the time I was assuming looking for additional ballistic evidence.
And did you personally find any additional evidence during the line search?
Not that I recall, no.
Thank you very much, officer. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Byers.
May it please the court?
Please.
Mr. Hagan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
This line search, was that done before or after the street sweeper came by?
I have no recollection of a street sweeper.
Okay. Are you aware that a street sweeper went through the crime scene?
I am not.
Okay. And you were the very first one there?
I was.
And you left at the very end?
I don't recall what time I left.
You left after the line search, which is at the very end of the processing, correct?
Right, I left when I was instructed to leave by my patrol supervisor.
Okay. It's a simple question. At the end of when everyone left, were you still there?
I don't recall leaving. I'm sorry not to be vague, but I don't recall being the last person on scene to leave.
Okay.
If that's what you're asking.
Let me put it this way. The scene was closed at approximately 5:20 a.m. Were you still there around 5:20 a.m.?
I would assume so.
Okay. So you stayed pretty much the whole time there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as the first officer on the scene, there are certain requirements and regulations that you must follow. Isn't that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And amongst them is probably the most important, which is secure the scene.
Right.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I want to
Yeah.
lower that down if I can. Sorry, Judge, may I approach?
Yeah.
See if I can do this.
Do we have some water?
Can you still see if need be?
Yeah, just back it up.
Officer. Nothing water, please.
Is that good?
That's good. Thank you, Your Honor.
I apologize, Officer Sereno. I just want to make sure we can all see you.
No
a little
problem.
Clear.
Okay.
Okay. Sir, so as I mentioned, one of the first things you're supposed to do is to immediately secure the scene, correct?
Yes.
Now, as part of securing the scene, it is to
Thank you.
no problem. You're hydrated, ready to go?
I am.
All right. Officer, when you arrived immediately, there was quite a little bit of chaos going on. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yes, as I stated, there were vehicles still in movement on the right side of the vehicle. I was in.
And there were people standing around watching?
Afterwards, I recalled, as I stated to the DA, I recall witnesses at a corner off the crime scene area.
Okay. There were several people there just trying to see what happened?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And once you pulled off, of course, your job is to turn on your lights, make sure everybody gets out of the way, correct?
Yes.
But at the same time, not leave.
Right.
Okay. And then your job is to set up a perimeter. Is that a yes? You have to
Yes.
You have to say yes
Sorry.
for Nancy. Okay. Now, after you set up this perimeter, the perimeter is supposed to be set up 50 feet in all directions, correct?
I would assume.
Okay. I don't want you to.
Sir, do you know that?
I do not know specific length, Your Honor.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may, sir.
I'm showing you, sir, what is Section 6, responsibilities of the responding officer. Can you, I'm sorry, I want to direct your attention to the last sentence. Go ahead and read it for your own.
Starting at N?
Yeah,
Okay. At,
you can read
Read
it
it
yourself.
yourself, if you would, sir.
Now that we're not assuming, sir, is it correct that your job is to set up a perimeter 50 feet in all directions?
yes.
Okay. Now, once you set this up, you have your cruiser that blocked where exactly?
My cruiser was placed, I parked the cruiser behind the vehicle that was identified in the pictures. So that would be on Shama facing Harold.
Okay, let me get the photos again. Okay, so you were, I'm sorry, what did you say you were behind?
Yes.
Okay. So that would have been pretty much your view.
Yes.
Okay. But all of these photographs Were not taken by you.
Of course not.
Okay. And all of these photographs have sheets all over the bodies in the car, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't do that.
No.
Who did that, sir?
I don't recall who did that.
Okay. Now, part of your job as the first responding officer is to, one, secure the scene, correct?
Correct.
And two, to ensure that, and to isolate people from entering the scene.
Correct.
Okay. And three, you're also, after you set up the perimeter, you're supposed to assist EMS if they come in on how to come into the scene, correct?
Correct.
Did you do that, sir?
Not that I recall assisting EMS in that regards anyways.
Okay. Now, and part of this as well is to preserve the entire integrity of the scene so that when crime scene investigators arrive, they can take accurate photographs of what the scene is supposed to look like for perhaps a jury.
Yes.
Okay. And that is so we don't mislead the jury in any way, shape, or form.
That's sustained.
And that is to paint an accurate picture for whomever shall come and view these photographs.
Is that a question?
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you don't know how much of the perimeter that you're supposed to set up, correct?
Correct.
You don't know who put the sheets on the bodies,
Correct.
and you don't know how EMS got to the bodies.
Correct.
And you don't know if a street sweeper ever came by.
Not to my recollection.
Now, the glass that was observed that you testified under direct, which was right here, did you ensure that no one stepped on that glass?
To my recollection, I informed other responding officers of the glass. I don't recall what my duties at the time were afterwards.
But you can't tell this jury that you made sure no one stepped on that glass.
No civilian or no police officer.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. I think the question and answer was a little confusing.
Yes, it
on the
was.
picture. Okay. You cannot tell this jury today that no one stepped on that glass.
Right, I cannot.
Now overruled.
Now, the scene was very dark that evening. Wouldn't you agree?
From what I can tell in the pictures, yes.
Okay. You don't have any independent recollection of that area, that it's a dark area?
I remember street lights being utilized at the time.
I'm aware that there's street lights, but my question to you is, do you have any independent recollection as to whether it was pretty dark there in that area, regardless of the street lights?
Yes, it was dark, but it was visible. With the street lights were an aid to seeing what was going on.
Okay. Now, is it fair to say, sir, that looking at this photograph, absent the flash, can't really see any light there, correct?
Besides the light in the background, correct.
Okay. We'll take it a little bit further back. Absent the flash, do you see any light there?
No.
Okay. So even as close as 2 feet to the right of that photograph, it's pitch dark, wouldn't you agree?
Pretty dark, yes.
Just want to clarify, all of these photographs, every single one of them, you did not take, right?
No, I did not take them.
And this was taken by crime scene investigators much later on.
Yes.
If I can have one moment, Judge, I want to make sure I don't have any further questions. When you arrived, sir, you checked to see if the bodies were, if the victims were responsive.
Yes.
And you did so verbally.
Yes.
You didn't touch anything.
No.
You didn't park the car, put the car in park.
Not to my recollection, I did not.
You didn't take the keys out of the car.
Not to my recollection.
No, or you don't recall?
I do not recall.
Did you take the keys and put them on the windshield?
I do not recall.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect? Thank you, officer. You may step down. Watch your step, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, jury.
We'll call Sergeant Sean McCarthy.
Swear the testimony you should give this court and jury and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you, sir. Can I call the officer?
Good morning, Your Honor.
May I begin, Your Honor? Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Sure. Sergeant Sean McCarthy, last name spelled McCarthy.
Are you a sergeant with the Boston Police Department?
I am.
How long have you been a member of a sworn officer or supervisor in the Boston Police Department?
I've been a member of the department for 18 years and a supervisor for roughly 5.
If you would, Sergeant McCarthy, can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury during that multi-year career with the Boston Police Department what areas or units you've been assigned to?
Sure. Started out in Area C11 in Dorchester, then Area C6 in South Boston. Then I was in the Youth Violence Strike Force Gang Unit for 3 years until 2007 when I made detective. As a detective, I was assigned to Area B2 in Roxbury and then to the Sexual Assault Unit until being promoted to Sergeant in 2012, where I was assigned to Area A1, and now I work in District Area E13 in Jamaica Plain.
Also as a supervising sergeant?
Correct.
Calling your attention now, Sergeant, to the time when you, shortly after being promoted to become a sergeant in what you described as Area A1. First, Area A1, can you describe for the jurors what area that encompasses?
Sure. It's downtown Boston, North End, Chinatown, Beacon Hill, Charlestown.
And as of calling your attention now to July 16th, the early morning hours of a Monday, 2012, were you assigned as a supervising sergeant to Area A1 covered downtown?
I was.
And at that point, how long had you been a supervising sergeant in A1?
Just a few weeks.
Calling your attention now, sir, to sometime at around 2:30 in the morning. Prior to 2:30 in the morning, had there been any incidents of note in the area of the theater district in Boston that you recall?
No.
Calling your attention now to about 2:30 in the morning, were you at the station or in your cruiser at that point?
I was in my cruiser.
Do you recall where you were when you heard something on the radio?
I was in the theater district area.
May I approach the witness, sir?
You may.
Just putting up next to you, Sergeant, what has been entered as exhibit number 4, overhead map, which depicts the theater district. Do you recognize that, sir?
I do.
And can you tell us approximately where you were when you heard a radio call?
I'll point to there. I was somewhere in the area. This is Tremont Street. This is Stewart Street. This is the area known as the theater district. I was somewhere in this area. Warrington Street, Stewart Street, possibly down here.
So around the corner from Cure?
Correct.
And when you received the radio call, sir, what was the nature of the radio call?
It was a call for shots fired.
And upon hearing the call for shots fired, were you aware of the location of the shots fired?
I was.
What were you indicated in that regard?
It was Shawmut Ave and Herald Street.
And calling your attention now to Exhibit 4, is that the area that's marked by the red circle?
That's correct.
And just to give the jurors in the court some clarification, this area here of Shawmut Avenue and Herald Street, is there a bridge that goes over something?
There is. It's travels over the Mass Pike.
And
Shawmut Ave.
is the Mass Pike labeled as Interstate 90 here on this diagram?
That's correct, right there.
And if you would, Sergeant, just to avoid any confusion, does Tremont Street, where I have the laser pointer here, does that turn into Shawmut Avenue at some point?
That's correct.
Where does it, if you know, sir?
Right here.
So Tremont continues to the right, but it then turns into Shawmut if you go straight?
Correct. Travels over to the south end.
So other than the name change from Tremont to Shawmut, is the area where you were heading to upon hearing the radio call the same street that Cure is on?
Correct.
About how long did it take you to get to that scene, Sergeant?
I would say less than a minute.
Just placing on the screen what's been entered as exhibit number 6. Do you recognize that photograph, sir?
I do.
And is that the area from which you were coming when you responded to the scene?
That's correct.
Please describe, if you would, Sergeant, what you observed upon arrival.
When I pulled up, there was multiple officers already on scene. Boston EMS was actually in front of this vehicle at the intersection on Herald Street, attending to a victim who had been shot. There was 2 males, a driver and a passenger, still inside the vehicle.
Placing exhibit 14 on the screen, again, recognizing there were sheets on them, was this the approximate positioning of the 2 individuals you saw in the car?
That's correct.
And what observations did you make of the individuals in the car, Sergeant?
I noticed the front seat passenger had a gunshot wound to the head, and he was deceased. And it appeared that the driver was also deceased.
So you saw no signs of life, Sergeant, at that point?
No.
Had you observed at all whether or not Boston Emergency Medical Services had attended to those?
I did not see them attending to them, no.
And at that point, when you observed them, had they been covered with sheets?
No.
In addition to responding officers, actually let me back up for a moment, Sergeant. The area where this happened, is that close to the border between what police call Area A1 and Area D4?
It is actually right on the border. Herald Street is on District 4, and Shawmut Ave, coming to that intersection before the lights, is District A1.
And what in Boston police parlance, what does District 4 cover?
District 4 covers the south end.
South end. So in addition to yourself now arriving, Sergeant, were there also not only Area A1 downtown officers, but also Area D4 South End officers?
That's correct. They were there.
Were you, at this point at least, that you described walking up to the car and observing the victims, were you the senior officer on scene at that point?
I was. From A1, I was.
Were there any other supervising sergeants from Area D4 present?
There was.
Who was that, if you recall?
Sergeant Cliff McHale from D4 was actually on scene before I was.
Just for the court reporter, is that M-C-H-A-L-E, Clifton McHale?
That's correct.
Sergeant, upon your arrival at the scene, as you observed the people in the car you described as deceased, what did you do or see next?
Like I said, I saw EMS was attending to another gunshot victim outside the ambulance. Shortly after that, he got inside the ambulance, and Sergeant McHale and myself instructed one of the A1 officers, Officer Eric James, to follow that ambulance to the hospital.
Now, before that ambulance left to the hospital with the individual you described that they were treating, did you make any observations of that individual and the wounds that he was suffering from?
I didn't really see him very well, but I believe that he was shot in the arm, either from somebody telling me that.
And did you get his name at some point?
I did not at the time.
At some point were you told that the name was Aquilino Friere?
I was told later, yes, in a report.
Now, you indicated, Sergeant, that upon consulting with Sergeant McHale, you directed an A1 officer, Boston police officer, to follow that ambulance to the hospital. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What's the purpose of that, sir?
That's to gather any information from the shooting victim. If he could talk and tell us anything, just to get an update on his status.
Which officer did you direct to follow him to the hospital?
It was Officer Eric James.
Now, Sergeant, at this point, after directing Officer James to follow the surviving victim to the hospital, what did you direct be done next?
I suppose the first thing we did was to set up a crime scene. We blocked traffic coming from Tremont down onto Shawmut Ave at that intersection with crime scene tape, making sure no traffic flowed onto the bridge because it's a one-way coming down, so we stopped traffic from the A1 side. Just instructed officers to look for any evidence, secure the crime scene, and there were some witnesses.
And officer, just backing up before we get to the witnesses, have you had training in securing crime scenes?
I have.
And in addition, as a detective, did you run and maintain crime scenes in your career?
Multiple crime scenes.
And can you describe for ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what are some of the primary functions of securing and maintaining a crime scene?
Well, the first thing is you want to secure it so that nobody else can actually come onto the scene after the fact. Witnesses, passerbys, you want to maintain the integrity of the scene. Locating witnesses, securing those witnesses, usually just making sure no traffic flows into the area or pedestrians.
Now, as far as priorities, Sergeant, even before maintaining or securing and maintaining the crime scene, is there any priority first related to victims at a scene?
Yes.
And does that take priority even over securing the scene as far as getting to the victims and determining whether or not they can be treated?
Of course.
So it's your understanding that officers, upon arrival at the scene, were they allowed to go up to the car and observe the victims?
Sustained in that form. Rephrase the question.
Sure.
Please.
Sergeant, in other words, upon your arrival as one of the supervisors at the scene, did you allow yourself to go up to the car and to look inside?
I did.
And how did that relate to your priorities at that crime scene?
Well, when the call came in, you want to make sure that people are alive, and if EMS was needed, that's the first thing is the health of the victims.
And did you make any determination, at least from your experience, whether those victims were alive or dead inside the car?
Yes, I did.
And what was that determination?
That they were dead.
Now, sir, you indicated that the crime scene was secured with cruisers that were blocking traffic. Do you know whether or not police tape was also set up?
Police tape was set up.
And you indicated that witnesses were secured. Please describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you did to assist or direct other officers to secure witnesses at the scene.
Sure. On the corner of Herald Street, there was a male witness and a female who were outside of their vehicle. So I instructed the officers to actually talk to them briefly, see what they knew, because obviously at the time we're trying to find out if there was a shooter, where they were, any vehicle descriptions, physical descriptions. They spoke to them, and I made sure that they kept them separated, the male and the female, on the corner until homicide detectives arrived to interview them further.
Sergeant, do you remember those two witnesses' names?
I believe the male's last name was McCann, and I believe it was his girlfriend.
Was that Sophie Fond, the woman with him?
Yes.
In addition to those individuals, did you see other witnesses at the scene that you asked other officers to secure?
I personally did not.
And Sergeant, I'm sorry, what did you do relative to any physical evidence at the scene at that point?
We didn't have any physical evidence in terms of ballistics. We searched for shell casings near the vehicle. We didn't find any at that time. So basically the evidence we had was the car itself.
Sergeant, what was the lighting like at that intersection?
Well, it was obviously roughly 2:30 in the morning, so it was dark out, but there was fairly sufficient light, street lights.
Did you and other officers at the scene have flashlights, department-issued flashlights?
Several officers did, yes.
Were the officers using them?
They were.
You indicated that there were no shell casings recovered, is that correct?
That's correct.
Sergeant, backing you up one moment, or a little bit in what you've testified to, at some point when you made the determination that the individuals in the car were deceased, did you do anything as far as notifying the Boston Police Department of anything in particular?
I did.
What was that, sir?
It's called full notifications.
What does that mean?
It's basically notifies the homicide unit as well as the crime scene response unit and any of the command staff members from headquarters, night command, that we just had a homicide at that location.
And at some point, did the specialized units you've just described, including the homicide unit, identification or crime scene response unit, prior to their arrival, you and Sergeant McHale were in charge of that scene?
That's correct.
And upon the arrival of homicide detectives, was the scene then turned over to them?
It was.
Relative to witnesses, Sergeant, did you direct officers to separate witnesses or have them be together?
I had them separated.
What's the purpose of that, sir?
Separating witnesses so that their version of the event stays to themselves.
Now, Sergeant, were you present, did you stay at the scene after the arrival of homicide detectives?
I did.
Did you stay at the scene essentially until it closed?
Correct.
Do you know about what time that was?
I can refer to my report, but it was roughly 4:35 in the morning.
Describe, if you would, Sergeant, what, if any, observations you made relative to the car or the decedents, the victims inside, being covered with sheets.
Did I make any?
Well, at some point, did you see that the victims were covered with sheets?
Yes.
And do you know how that was done? Who did that, and why?
I'm not aware who covered them, but after a homicide, eventually the bodies do get covered with sheets.
And on the outside of the crime scene, Sergeant, did you notice at any point the arrival of media and other onlookers?
There was.
And they were outside of the crime scene, but still, were they within view of the car?
Yes.
And if you know, Sergeant, what are some of the purposes of covering the decedents with sheets?
It's same thing with the crime scene integrity, as well as to respect the bodies of the decedents, of the victims.
And when you arrived at the scene, Sergeant, do you know whether or not the car was in park or drive, or if the keys had been taken out, if you know?
I do not know.
Were you present when a search that's oftentimes referred to as a line search was conducted?
I was.
Please describe what you observed or participated in that regard.
So we did a line search. We conducted a line search of the bridge going from Herald back towards District A1. It's basically officers line up together at arm's length and walk at a slow pace, basically looking at the ground for any evidence.
In the line search, Sergeant, do you know where it started on the diagram there?
Yes.
Exhibit 4?
So this is the end of the bridge onto Herald Street. So we did a line search from Herald back to the end of the bridge on Marginal.
So that full block from the beginning of Herald all the way to Marginal?
That's correct.
And you say officers were walking arm in arm?
Pretty much, yes, at arm's length.
And what, if anything, do officers look for during that line search?
Any physical evidence, ballistic evidence, clothing, anything that could pertain to the incident.
And in addition, Sergeant, were you aware of whether or not a K-9 unit was brought to the scene?
I was.
And was a K-9 unit brought to the scene?
It was.
Describe for the jurors what a K-9 unit is and what its purpose is.
So the K-9 unit's an officer with his dog who's trained in searches. K-9s will search for ballistic evidence as well, physical evidence.
Maybe I have one more. Sergeant McCarthy, I have no further questions.
Mr. Byers.
Please support. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Now, you were not the second officer to arrive, correct?
No,
In fact, when you arrived, there were several officers there before you.
that's correct.
So you can't tell this jury what was done before you got there, other than what was conveyed to you,
Correct.
okay? And you testified a moment ago that you were the one who gave directions to start establishing the perimeter,
Correct.
okay? Do you know how far of a perimeter that you have to establish for a crime scene,
Every crime scene's different.
okay? Are you aware of any regulations that say exactly how many feet is the minimum of what you must establish?
Not off the top of my head, no.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you, sir, Section 6, which are responsibilities of the first responding officer. If you can, I guess for your to look at the last sentence real quick.
Okay.
May I have that?
Sure.
Sir, is it fair to say the established perimeter that must be set up by the first responding officer is 50 feet in all directions?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you're not the first responding officer. You supervise the first responding officer.
That's correct.
So basically, you're his boss.
Correct.
Okay. And several officers were there before you got there.
That's correct.
And you mentioned that it was dark at night
It was.
and that you still had some street lighting,
There was.
but officers needed flashlights to search around and to assist themselves in maneuvering about.
Yes.
Okay. So if someone is there and they don't have flashlights, it's pretty dark.
There was street lights. Like I said, there was street lighting. That was the only lighting. That was the only form of light.
All right, well, let's look at these photographs and see if you would agree that it's a pretty dark area. You see that photograph?
I do.
Okay, and do you, other than the flash that's listed there, would you agree it's fair to say that that's a pretty dark area?
Yes.
Okay. And it's even closer shot of the BMW. Being that close, other than the flash, would you agree it's a pretty dark area?
It appears dark. Yes.
So it's a good idea that officers use flashlights.
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the things that's difficult to see that evening is blood, correct?
Sometimes.
Okay. And blood pattern evidence is extremely important to a crime scene.
It can be.
Okay. Let me pin you down a little bit better than that, sir. It's always important to note blood at a crime scene.
Yes.
Okay. And blood evidence and its patterns can tell law enforcement many things.
It can.
Okay. And it's important to document each and every area where there is blood, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you observe a trail of blood that went around the corner there on Shema?
I did not.
Did you supervise or instruct anyone to not trample upon the blood that was there?
Yes. Officers know not to step on blood.
Okay. Did you specifically instruct anyone to stay away from that area of blood?
Yes.
Okay. Even though you didn't see any?
You're saying there's trail of blood. How far did the trail? I'm talking about around the vehicle. There was blood droplets that officers knew not to step on.
Okay. And are you aware that there was a blood trail going around the corner there?
Not off the top of my head. I don't recall
See
that.
if I can point to the direction. Right there's the corner, and then turning down this way. Sorry for the little shaking there.
In this direction?
Correct, right there, in that direction.
Okay.
Did you see any blood going around that corner?
I don't recall.
Now, as the supervisor of the crime scene, that would be important to you because you, of course, would want to know who was bleeding and where they went.
Yes.
Okay. And that would assist you in which direction this person or individual may have gone.
Correct.
And you were immediately looking for individuals.
Potential victims or suspects, yes.
Okay. Now, there were 3 gentlemen that you later found out were in the back seat of the car.
Yes.
One was injured,
Yes.
and he was being tended to by EMS.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you testified that you have no idea who put the sheets on the bodies?
I do not recall.
Okay. Now, is it not the job of the officers that are at the crime scene to guide EMS when entering the scene?
Yes, EMS actually beat us to the scene at that night.
Okay.
But yes, we instruct the EMS.
Okay. And when you say EMS beat you to the scene,
Yes.
EMS was there before you?
Correct.
Okay. So whatever happened before you with EMS, you have no idea and you can't tell this jury anything about?
Correct.
Okay. And you did not see them put the sheets on?
I did not.
But at some point, well, let me rephrase that. You got there before the sheets were placed.
That's correct.
And while you're there, sheets are being placed on the body.
At some point in time, yes.
And you're the supervisor of that scene, and you don't know who did it.
I do not recall who put the sheets on.
Okay. Now, you're aware that sheets being placed on the body could destroy trace evidence.
It could.
Okay. And including any blood pattern evidence that may be there that could assist law enforcement.
It could.
Okay. And this blood pattern evidence can also assist the jury in possibly determining what happened.
Sustained.
This blood evidence could possibly assist you in determining what happened.
It could.
Okay. And in addition to that, these sheets, well, let me ask you this. Do you know where these sheets came from?
EMS.
Okay. They're EMS sheets?
They are.
Do you know where they were beforehand?
I do not.
Okay. So you don't know where these sheets have been?
Nope.
And you don't know how they got on the bodies?
By EMS.
Okay. So now you're testifying that EMS is the one that put the sheets on the bodies?
I did not instruct EMS to put the sheets on the bodies, but they did
Okay.
at some point in time.
But do you recall testifying a moment ago that you don't know who put the sheets on the body?
I believe EMS put the sheets on the body.
My
They're
question
the
to
only
you-
ones who would do it.
My question to you, sir, is you recall testifying a moment ago to this jury that you don't know who put the sheets on the body?
EMS put the sheets on the body.
My question, and you need to answer my question, sir, is do you recall telling this jury that you don't recall who put the sheets on the body?
No, you may answer that question, and you may explain what you mean by your answer.
As the question as I understood it is, I did not instruct EMS to put the sheets on the body. EMS put the sheets on the body by themselves, not under my direction, which is common at crime scenes. When there are deceased people, the sheets end up on the bodies. In this situation, I did not instruct EMS to put the sheets on the body.
Again, sir, you didn't answer my question. My question is, do you remember telling this jury that you don't recall who put the sheets on the body?
I may have said that, but if I did, I amend that.
Okay. Now, is there anything else you'd like to amend while we're here?
Nope.
Okay. Now, sir, when you talk about sheets being placed on the body, this, of course, is after the scene is photographed, correct?
Depends.
So it's your testimony, sir, that sheets should be placed on bodies before they're ever even photographed by crime scene personnel.
Sometimes that can happen.
I didn't ask you if it could happen, because I obviously it did. My question to you is, are you telling this jury that it's okay to put sheets on bodies before they're ever photographed?
Sustained.
Let me rephrase that, sir. Are you telling this jury that it is acceptable procedure to place sheets on bodies before they're ever even photographed?
See you at sidebar.
You're experienced at managing crime scenes,
I have some experience, yes, as a detective.
okay? And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about your experience?
As a detective, I was assigned to Area B2 in Roxbury for 3 years and as a sexual assault detective for 2 years.
Okay. And you're aware of the preservation of evidence?
I am.
You've been trained?
I have.
And you have a significant amount of experience in that regard.
Yes.
And that's why they call you to supervise the scene,
Correct.
because you're the more experienced person,
I was.
even though you don't even know how much of a perimeter you're supposed to establish.
Overruled.
I can speak to the perimeter issue. The perimeter issue is separate. Every different crime scene is different, depending on traffic flow, buildings, pedestrians, intersections. You basically set up a perimeter as far as you can, as far as you deem necessary at that time.
But the minimum is 50 feet at a street when there's a vehicle involved, correct?
According to the rules and regulations, it's 50 feet.
Okay. Now, sir, getting back to the sheets being placed on the body, you're aware, of course, that it is improper to put anything on a body or to disturb a scene before it's photographed.
Now, overruled.
Yes, in this situation, sheets were placed on the body prior to being photographed.
Okay. And thereby, that scene is now contaminated.
Now, overruled, in your opinion, sir.
In my opinion, I wouldn't officially call the scene contaminated just because sheets are put on the bodies.
Of course not, sir. Now, let me ask you this.
Objection sustained.
Let me ask you this, sir. You are not a blood pattern expert.
I am not.
You're not a DNA expert.
No,
You're not an expert in trace recovery.
I am not.
You're not an expert in fibers.
I am not.
Okay, so all of these fields of expertise that could come into play, you have zero training in.
That's correct.
But what you're trained in is to preserve a scene,
That's correct.
to preserve its integrity,
That's correct.
to ensure it does not get contaminated.
That's correct.
And part of that process, probably the most important process, is to photograph it so that everyone here could see it at its realest form.
Sustained.
So that law enforcement can see this at its closest form to the time of the crime.
That's correct.
Now, there was glass on the side of the, do you notice, can you see the glass that's there on the bottom?
I can.
Okay. Apologize for the poor question, sir. Do you see the glass that's there next to the BMW on the driver's side back seat?
I do.
Okay. Did you instruct anyone not to step in that area?
Yes.
Okay. And that is, of course, because that glass could contain valuable evidence.
Correct.
Okay. And that glass would be considered physical evidence.
Yes.
Okay. Did you instruct anyone to collect that glass?
I did not.
And that would, of course, be your job as the supervising officer.
No.
It would be crime scene investigator's job.
It would be the homicide detectives are the ones who basically take the scene over, and they direct the physical collection of evidence. They would direct that.
Now, one of the things you testified under direct examination for the jury was that you instructed officers to go around and start talking to witnesses.
Yes.
Okay. And when you did this, did you observe these witnesses?
I did.
In fact, you were able to name a couple of them, right?
Yes.
Now, did you see a gentleman approximately 6 foot, 6'2", a black male of Cape Verdean descent standing there covered in blood?
No, I did not.
Other than the person who was shot and being tended to EMS?
Correct.
Were there any other individuals with blood on them at the scene?
There was not.
Okay. And it came to your determination that 2 of the individuals in the BMW had fled?
After we found that out much later, but
Much later?
yeah.
Okay. And when you found that out, of course, that raises some suspicions?
Sustained.
When you find information like that out, you then want to follow up on that, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's something important.
Yes.
Okay. These are potential witnesses.
Correct.
This could fill the pieces of the puzzle as to what actually happened for you.
No, you may answer that.
Yes, it could.
Okay. And did you instruct anyone actually, wait a second, you actually did instruct people to go looking for them, right?
Yes. Any situation where there's a shooting like that, a homicide, our officers basically scour the area for everything. Victims, suspects, evidence.
Okay.
In no time did we come across a male covered with blood. None of the officers did.
Now, when you get a car and it is secured, before the car is towed, you're to do an inventory search, are you not, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a whole list of things that you're supposed to do when doing an inventory search of what's in the car.
Correct.
Okay. And part of that, of course, is securing any items and documenting which items are there.
Yes.
And this is to ensure that nobody claims that police took anything.
Correct.
Okay. And this permits you to go into the car and look around and get whatever potential items that you can to write down, right?
Yes.
And this is, of course, supposed to be done after the car is photographed.
In this situation, I'm not sure how, the homicide detectives would be the one who were in charge of the vehicle and the tow, so in terms of the photographs, the crime scene unit was under the direction of the homicide detectives, so I don't have any knowledge about the tow and the inventory.
Okay. So as a scene supervisor, you did not order it to be inventoried at all?
I do not.
Okay. Now, you mentioned to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you had called for a canine to come out.
I did.
Okay. Now, was this canine, are you aware if this canine was trained in recovery of drugs?
I'm not aware of the dog's training.
Okay. Was it a cadaver dog?
Not aware.
Okay. So you just brought a dog around, you don't know what it's trained on, just to look around.
I called for a canine to search the area for any.
You're aware that dogs are trained for different things, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Some are trained to look for firearms.
Correct.
Some are trained to look for explosives.
Correct.
Some are trained to sniff out drugs.
Yes.
Okay. And this is the dog that you called out, but you don't know what they were trained on.
I didn't personally call that dog. When I get on the radio, I ask for a canine to assist us at the scene. And whoever responds, whatever canine officer is in the area and responds, that's who it is.
And this canine was then allowed to enter the crime scene?
I'm not sure if he actually entered the crime. He was more on the perimeter of the crime scene.
And what was its purpose for you?
Basically, to find anything. At that point in time, we were aware that there was possibly more victims that were in that car. One could be laid up around the corner. There could be ballistic evidence. Like I said, I don't know what the dog was trained in, but he's there for a search.
You're just hoping it'd lead you to something, even though you don't know what it's trained on.
That's correct.
If I could have just a moment. Oh, I do have another question I need to bring up. Were you present when the street sweeper went by?
I'm not aware of any street sweeper.
You have no clue as to whether a street sweeper went by this crime scene?
After speaking to other officers after the fact, much after this incident, I was brought to the attention about a street sweeper, but I never spoke to a street sweeper or had any knowledge of what his involvement was.
Okay, so you would amend your first answer where you said you're not aware of any street sweeper?
No, you may explain when you learned of that, whether you were aware of that at the time you were on this scene.
At the time on the scene, I was not aware of any street sweeper, but it was brought to my attention after the fact that somebody spoke to a street sweeper that was in the area.
You were on the scene till 5:20 a.m.
Correct.
And from when you arrived, approximately at 2:30. 2:33 a.m. to 5:20, you had no idea that a street sweeper had come by.
Like I said, after the fact is when I found out about the street sweeper. But
When after the fact, sir?
This is after the crime scene was already broken down, after the incident had occurred.
After 5:20 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay.
That's when it came to my attention.
You arrived fairly early on.
I did.
And you got there later. I mean, you stayed until it ended.
I did.
Okay. And after that is when they told you about the street sweeper.
Correct.
So you're not aware, did you see when the street sweeper came back?
Nope.
Okay. So you weren't paying attention to that?
No.
If I can have just a moment, Judge, to see if I have further questions. Sorry, I'd like to pin you down a little closer in time as to when you became aware of the street sweeper. Was it yesterday? Was it that same evening? What?
Later on, after the crime scene was broken down, somebody had mentioned to me that one of the officers in relation to a street sweeper, that homicide detectives may have talked to a street sweeper or something that was in the area, but it was after the fact.
So approximately 5, 6 a.m.?
Could have been.
I have no further questions. Now, Sergeant, you were asked a number of questions by Mr. Baez about the setting up of a perimeter. I believe you started to explain, but I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to fully explain. Can you describe for the jurors?
Put the question.
Can you describe for the jurors what you mean by every crime scene is different relative to the way a perimeter is set up?
Sure. So obviously every crime scene is different. This was an intersection, one-way intersection coming from Tremont onto Chalmette Ave, so we decided to block it off right here at Marginal Street, as it's a one-way coming down here, so there'll be no pedestrians and or vehicles traveling this way. And we set up a crime scene with vehicles located right here, so we set up a perimeter over on these corners right here, just as.
And when you said that every scene is different, though, can you explain, are there certain scenes where the perimeter would even be more than 50 feet, or perhaps sometimes even less than 50 feet?
Sometimes smaller, yes, depending on the time and place. If an incident occurs in front of a busy shopping mall, it might not be 50 feet at that given time and place. It's virtually impossible when there's a ton of pedestrian, a ton of traffic, to actually get the crime scene that big at that time. Sometimes if it's late at night or early in the morning and there's nobody around, you can set it up even larger.
Now, you were also asked on cross-examination, Sergeant, a number of questions about whether or not you saw blood and the lighting of the crime scene. You recall those questions?
Yes.
My first witness, Ron?
You may.
Sergeant, I'm going to show you one picture first. I'd ask you if you recognize that, sir.
Yes, I do.
And is that a photograph of the passenger side of the car on July 16, 2012, the car that you testified about?
It is.
And does it, the difference as far as that photograph and others that you've identified in the course of your testimony, does this have some additional items placed around it, some things that are orange?
It does.
What are those?
Cones?
And who places the cones at a scene, or in this particular case, who placed the cones?
Investigators at the crime scene or homicide unit.
So at this scene, Sergeant, is it fair to say, or did the crime scene response unit come to the scene and process it?
They did.
And whose job is it, Sergeant, to process a scene, meaning to identify all potential evidence, mark it, and photograph it? Is that your job or the crime scene response unit?
The crime scene response unit.
Is the crime scene response unit, to your knowledge, specially trained to do that?
They are.
And the photograph I have before you that you've identified, does that show some indication of processing by the crime scene response unit?
It does.
Or not, that this photograph be marked as the next number exhibit? No,
Exhibit 16.
So just placing Exhibit 16 on the screen. You were asked a number of questions by Mr. Baez about the lighting of the crime scene. How would you describe the lighting in this photograph?
Average.
But again, it's a little. How would you describe it in relation to the photos from the back of the car? In other words, was it darker in the back than it was in the side, or vice versa?
It's
I'll rephrase
I'm
the
not
question.
sure it's leading, but I think the photo speaks for itself.
So this is a photograph here, and you indicated, Sergeant, that this had some evidence of being marked by the crime scene response unit. The cones I'm referring or pointing to here,
Yes.
those cones placed by you, the crime scene response unit.
crime scene response unit.
And these little orange things that appear to be tape, that appear to be marking something at the crime scene, is that you or members of the crime scene response unit?
Crime scene response unit.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to look at 23 other photographs, if you would.
May I approach? I didn't see all the photos.
Certainly. Well, now, hold on one sec. Let Mr. Baez see the photos, please.
Did you look through those, sir?
I didn't finish all of them. Okay. I can go through them.
So do the 23 photographs depict anything that you recognize?
Yes.
And do they appear to depict fair and accurate representations of further photographs taken of the scene, and in particular blood drops leading to and around, from and around the car?
That's what the pictures are.
And the photographs, do they have any markings that, in your training experience, suggest that they're being marked and photographed by any specialized unit at the Boston Police Department?
Yes.
And what unit would that be?
That would be crime scene response unit.
At this point, I just asked that the 23 photographs be marked for identification only.
All right, can we receive them collectively for identification?
Your Honor, we'll move to introduce the 23 photographs.
All right, any objection?
As an exhibit or
As an exhibit.
just as exhibits, not as evidence? Correct?
In evidence. Your Honor, we'll mark them collectively as marked for identification. They'll be entered individually with the two witnesses.
Next letter designation.
C for identification.
All right, C for identification. And ladies and gentlemen, let me explain something to you. I've explained what constitutes evidence, being the testimony of witnesses, exhibits, and any stipulations or agreements. Exhibits, I told you, were those items that were introduced into evidence and were given an exhibit number. So we number exhibits by number. What has just occurred here are a series of photographs that are now presented and marked for identification with a letter designation. That means that they are not formally exhibits yet. They have not been received into evidence as exhibits. Rather, they've been identified, in this case by this witness, as something this witness recalls or recognizes, but it may be that they will be further identified and then introduced through another witness. So understand the distinction. Items introduced and given a number are exhibits. Something given a letter designation is not a full exhibit, but offered at this stage for identification only. Mr. Hagan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a few more questions, Sergeant. You were asked by Mr. Baez about your knowledge that there were other people in the car. I believe you indicated that based upon that knowledge, you directed some type of search. Can you just describe that in a little more detail, what you directed and what they were looking for?
So obviously, if there's more victims, they could still be in the area. That's what we looked for. In the vicinity of that area of Shum and Herald, we looked to see if there was any victims possibly injured.
And did you direct officers to conduct that search?
Yes.
Now, finally, Sergeant, calling your attention to the number of questions you were asked by Mr. Baez about contamination of the scene. You recall those questions?
I do.
I'm calling your attention now to your experience, which you indicated you have had experience in training and processing crime scenes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Have you, particularly in Area B2 or other assignments, have you responded to drive-by shootings?
I've responded to many shootings.
Have you responded to shootings that, at least with the information you received as a detective, took place where the shooter was a distance from the victim?
Yes.
I'm calling your attention now to your answer to Mr. Baez's question related to, I believe in response to his question, you said, I wouldn't call it contaminated because sheets were placed over bodies. Can you describe what you meant by that answer?
So obviously the situation is sometimes when there's deceased people in a public place, blankets are sometimes, or sheets are sometimes placed over the dead body prior to being photographed, or that's basically what I was trying to explain.
And you were asked a number of questions about a blood pattern analysis that can be done. You recall those questions?
Yes.
And as far as the blood that you saw on the decedents that you described in the car, did it appear to be their own blood?
It did.
And your, strike that. Mr. Baez asked you a number of questions about, you recall a couple of questions he asked you about trace evidence?
Yes.
And calling your attention again to the various drive-by shootings that you may have investigated in the course of your career, is there any significance, again, to the distance from which a shooter is to the victim as to whether or not you would expect trace evidence on the victim's clothing?
This witness has already testified do not have any training in trace evidence or blood pattern evidence.
Overruled.
Question again?
Is there any significance, again, from your training experience as to whether or not trace evidence would be left on a shooting incident where the shooter was a significant distance from the victims?
Obviously, the further away the shooter is, there would be little to no evidence from the shooter on the victim's body if he's far away.
And as far as blood pattern analysis on a deceased victim who had been shot from a distance away, again, your training experience, is there any significance in your mind as to blood pattern analysis on their clothing?
Same objection.
The objection is overruled, but understand we're receiving this officer's personal opinion.
Thank you.
As to blood pattern evidence of...
In other words, Mr. Baez asked you whether or not placing a sheet on the dead body of the two individuals in the car would contaminate blood pattern analysis evidence on their clothing. Again, do you have an opinion based on your training experience what blood pattern analysis would be on their clothing that would be contaminated by placing a sheet on it?
No, I don't believe it. The blood that's on their clothes is going to remain on their clothes.
I may have one moment. Thank you, Sergeant. I have no further questions.
Sergeant, nobody asked you about crime scenes in like a bathroom, correct?
No.
Okay, so we're not talking about a 50-foot perimeter at a bathroom or shopping mall.
Correct.
Okay, you were asked specifically, and you're here today to testify to shooting at a street.
Correct.
So the 50-foot minimum regulation applies,
It does.
for which you did not know at the time.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, as it related to the blood, that, well, actually, no, let me strike that and go to this. The sheets being placed over and blood pattern analysis. Blood pattern analysis can tell you many things, correct?
Correct.
Okay. It can tell you the possible positioning of the victim at the time.
Correct.
It could tell you it could assist in the directionality of the bullets.
Correct.
So given this information at a shooting, whether you're up front or far away, blood pattern analysis is still an important piece of evidence.
It is.
Okay. Now, same thing with DNA. You're not aware what items may or may not have been touched prior or after the shooting.
Correct.
And that would make DNA evidence important in an investigation.
Yes.
And finally, you had testified some things about crime scene having done certain things.
Yes.
Okay. It's important for crime scene to report to you as the supervisor as to what they're finding.
Actually, on the scene, that crime scene had their own supervisor there.
My question to you, sir, is you're now directing everybody, all the officers. Hey, I want you to go look for witnesses, right?
Correct.
Hey, I want you to do this.
Yes.
Hey, I want you to do that.
Yes.
Okay, that's part of the investigation.
It is.
Okay, so if crime scene personnel finds something, like a trail of blood around the corner,
Yep.
that's important for you to know.
It'd be more important for their supervisors. Like I said, when the crime scene unit response arrived, they have their own supervisor, and actually homicide was already there, so they're under the direction of the homicide unit, so they wouldn't report anything specific to me.
But it would be important for you to know so you can direct officers to assist in the investigation, right?
Yes.
okay? And including this canine that you didn't know what was trained on, right?
Yes.
Okay? And you just told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that those photographs were a fair and accurate representation of what they depict,
They were.
okay? But yet you didn't know that they even existed.
I knew there was blood droplets. I don't know the exact direction of the blood droplets.
Do you recall testifying under first cross-examination that you were unaware as to whether a trail of blood was around the corner?
Yes.
Okay. And you just testified before the ladies and gentlemen of the jury telling them that those photographs of the blood around the corner were a fair and accurate representation of what they depict.
They are.
Okay. But yet you did not see it.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Anything else? Thank you, sir. You may step down. Please watch your step.
Thank you.
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth calls Officer Eric James.
Solemnly swear the testimony you give this court and jury in the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant of the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes, I'll call the officer. Swear this way, sir.
Mr. Hagan.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Officer Eric K. James, last name James.
Just for the court reporters, Eric spelled E-R-I-C-K, a K at the end.
Yes, sir.
And are you a Boston police officer, sir?
Yes, sir.
How long have you been with the Boston Police Department?
26 years, sir.
Could you describe generally for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury during that 20-plus year career, what units or areas you've been assigned to as a Boston police officer?
I did 10 years in Roxbury, 10 years in Hyde Park, 6 years downtown Boston in District A1, and 6 months or so in District 14. I am presently in the Hackney unit out of police headquarters.
Officer, I'm calling your attention now to a particular date, that being the very early morning hours of July 16, 2012. What area or unit were you assigned to at that point?
I was assigned to a service unit in District A1, the Bravo 437 Alpha.
Did you work a certain shift, sir, at that time?
Midnight, 11:45 to 7:30 a.m.
So I'm calling your attention out of that particular night. Again, it's a Sunday night that leads into Monday morning, approximately 2:15 or 2:20 in the morning. Where were you at that point, sir?
In the theater district at the corner of Tremont and Stewart Street.
And just ask you to orient yourself to the diagram to your left, what's been entered as exhibit number 4. Does that appear to be a fair and accurate representation of the area to satellite view? This area being Stewart Street, this area being Tremont Street?
Yes, sir.
The area where you were when I referred you to the 2:15, 2:20 in the morning, is that the area where I have the laser pointer depicted now on exhibit 4?
Yes, sir.
What was your assignment or duties, or what were you doing at that point?
At the end of the night, we go down and make sure that the crowd leaves the club area safely.
And how many clubs are in that area, sir, just generally speaking?
Several, 5, 6, I don't know.
Do those include the clubs that are marked on that exhibit 4, Club Cure, which appears to be on the corner of Tremont and Stewart, as well as Club Venue and Club Rumor, which appears to be further down on Warrenton Street?
Yes, sir.
At some point, Officer James, again about 2:15, 2:20, did you receive a call for a potential person with a gun?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do in relation to that call?
When I heard it, they gave a location of Harold and Sharman Ave area, a person with a gun, and I immediately went to the area in search of the vehicle.
And how long did it take you to get there?
A matter of seconds. I was like right from Tremont and Stewart, maybe 5, 10 seconds. I don't know.
Is it fair to state at some point, officer, prior to this trial, you've had an opportunity to watch surveillance video that's purportedly from the Tufts Medical Center parking garage on Tremont Street that looks down on Tremont Street. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
At some point, were you able to identify your police cruiser coming down in relation to that call?
Yes, sir.
And when you got to Tremont, or Shawmut and Harold Streets to search for a particular car, did you see anything?
No, sir.
What did you do next?
I circled the block, came back up Washington Street, and back to the location where I was at, Tremont Stewart.
And just to orient the jurors, so you went back down this direction, went back up Washington Street, and ended up back at the area of Tremont and Stewart?
Yes, sir.
And a short time later, close to 2:30 in the morning, did you receive a radio call or did you talk to somebody that caused you to go somewhere?
It was another radio call.
And what was the nature of the radio call?
Detail officer had said that passerby had told him that someone was shot at that same location.
Did you go to the location?
Yes, sir.
And again, this time, how long did it take you to get there?
Same amount of time.
The area, the red mark, is that the area of Shawmut and Harold Street where you arrived?
Yes, sir.
And upon your arrival, Officer James, where would you say you were in order of responding officers? In other words, I shouldn't say where, but when you arrived, were other officers present at the scene or were you the first responding?
There were other officers there.
Where would you say you were in order of arrival? First, second, third, fourth, fifth?
Maybe third.
I've just placed on the screen what's been entered as exhibit number 6. Let's try to get it to focus. Do you recognize that photograph, sir?
Yes, sir.
And is that what you first observed upon your arrival at that scene?
Yes, sir.
And describe what you saw and what you did upon your arrival.
I stopped short of that incident to keep my car out of the actual crime scene. I walked up and I observed a young man standing off on the bridge with some blood coming from, I believe, his arm.
And when you say off the side of the bridge, is that the area over here in the
Yes,
photograph?
sir. Yes, sir.
And there was blood coming from his arm?
Yeah, well, he had blood and he was kind of wrapped up with something. I really didn't go near him.
What happened next?
Then I went over to the vehicle and I didn't know at that time that it was a fatality to check the victims, and I observed that they weren't.
Which side did you go to, the driver's or passenger side?
Passenger side, sir.
When you looked into the passenger side of the vehicle, officer, what did you observe?
I observed 2 males that had been deceased.
The passenger was deceased?
Yes, sir.
What about the driver?
He was also deceased, sir.
Did you notice any injuries to them?
I just saw blood. I can't recall. I believe there was a gunshot wound to the head on the passenger side.
And at some point, officer, did you then direct your attention to the person who you described was on the sidewalk suffering from a wound to his arm?
He was being assisted by other officers. I didn't go over that side.
Was EMS there yet, sir?
They were just arriving.
Do you know whether or not the car was in gear or in park? Do you know?
I don't recall.
What happened upon the arrival of EMS and other responding officers, including supervisors?
I was directed to follow the ambulance to the hospital.
Did you follow the ambulance to the hospital?
They were a couple of minutes ahead of me, but I got there, yes, sir.
And the ambulance was, who was inside of the ambulance?
The victim
Which victim?
that was standing on the bridge with the gunshot wounds.
Did you later learn his identity to be Aquilino Freire?
I did, sir.
Had you talked to Mr. Freire prior to him getting in the ambulance?
No, sir.
When you followed the ambulance, what hospital did you follow them to?
Tufts emergency room.
Just by way of the diagram that's been entered as exhibit number 4, is that right over here, the Tufts Medical Center?
Yes, sir.
When you arrived at the medical center behind the ambulance, what did you do next?
I went inside where they were assisting the victim at.
And did you stand with the victim as doctors began to examine him and treat him?
I stood outside the door, sir.
At some point, did you speak to the attending physician, or were you present when there was a conversation with him?
Yes, sir.
At some point, officer, was clothing placed into a brown paper bag, and did you observe that clothing?
Yes, sir.
Did you become aware at some point while you were at the hospital that Mr. Ferrier had suffered a gunshot wound to his left forearm?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, his right forearm. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Were you present when homicide detective Paul McIsaac responded to the hospital to take custody of the clothing, sir?
Yes, sir.
Did you get any information relative to the bullet, if there was one, that was in Mr. Ferrier's arm?
Yes, I was told that it was removed and sent to the pathology lab at the hospital.
Did you advise Detective McIsaac from the homicide unit of that information?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, officer. No further questions.
Rise.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You're, as a patrol officer, part of your duties and responsibilities are to fill out police reports.
Yes, sir.
And most important part of filling out a police report is to be as detailed as possible.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, it's extremely important because that helps you and remember what you actually did.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it also eliminates the questions as to what you did or did not do.
Yes, sir.
And you, of course, want to be accurate
I do my best, sir.
and as detailed as possible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. It also prevents you from being perhaps influenced later on by other officers if you have everything written in your report.
Why don't you rephrase that as to whether or not that's one of this witness's purposes or training purposes?
If it's not in here, you didn't do it.
Excuse me, sir?
If it's not in here, you didn't do it. Well, let me rephrase that. You would always document important things in your report.
Again, I do my best, sir.
You wouldn't intentionally do so.
Negative.
Okay. Now, I heard you testify. In fact, the first thing you testified to was that you drove by the scene.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is prior to anything happening.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's important evidence, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the reason it's important because now it helps us establish approximate time that this whole thing happened.
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm showing you both of your reports, sir. Can you take a look at them? Did you offer any other reports other than those, sir?
No, sir.
Okay. May I get those back? Do you document in any of these two reports that you had passed by that scene earlier that evening?
No, sir.
Now, when you arrived, you said EMS was arriving about the same time?
Yes, sir.
Did they arrive before you or after?
I don't recall. I don't recall, sir.
Did you see a street sweeper come by the crime scene while you were there?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you become aware that a street sweeper had come by the scene at any time?
No, sir.
And no one ever informed you of that?
No, sir.
After doing this, sir, you were then instructed to follow the ambulance to the hospital?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you testified to Mr. Hagan's questions about the injuries sustained by Mr. Ferrier, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He only asked you about one injury, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was to his right forearm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But in fact, he had two injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
One to his right, for which Mr. Hagan pointed out,
Yes, sir.
and one to his left, for which Mr. Hagan didn't point out.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that would indicate to you that two different bullets
Sustained.
That was important enough for you to put in your report.
It was, sir.
Okay. And you took note of that.
Second, sir?
You took note of that, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, if I can have, now I'm looking at this picture here. I just wanted to point something out. It was pretty dark that night.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In fact, even in this photograph, outside of the BMW, unless you had a flashlight, pretty hard to see.
Pretty hard to see what, sir?
Just outside of the car. Can you agree?
Okay.
Is that a yes?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. In fact, with this photograph, there's a police cruiser with its headlights on, right?
Yes, sir.
One in the front, right?
Yes, sir.
And one in the back, lighting up so the photograph can be taken.
Possibly.
Let me try to eliminate the possibility. You see two cruisers there, correct, sir?
I do, sir.
Okay. And do you know if the lights of those cruisers are on?
Possibly.
Okay. When you arrived, did you park your car there?
No, I was beyond.
Behind the two cruisers?
Well, I can't say that those cruisers were there like that because I came early on and I left to go to the hospital.
I
So
understand.
rather, I said possibly because I don't know if they were lighting up for the cameras or not because I didn't see any cameras when I was there.
Right. That was before these photos were taken. I realize that. I'm talking about, I'm asking you about the lighting conditions. Like, if I can have just one moment. When you arrived, sir, did you see another gentleman, a black male, approximately 6 to 6 feet too tall, of Cape Verdean descent with blood all over him, other than Mr. Friere?
I don't recall, sir.
Okay. You noted in your report that two of the other individuals in the car had fled, right?
I believe I noted that from what the victim told me, sir.
Okay. So you did actually speak with the victim
At the hospital, yes, sir.
at the hospital. And when you spoke with the victim, it was fairly recent to the event.
Yes, sir.
And it's important to get as much information you can most recent to the event, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's because most people's memories get worse with time.
Sustained.
I'll lay a little more foundation. You're trained, sir, that it's important to get information early on.
Yes, sir.
And that's because that gives you a more accurate picture.
Sustained.
It's your understanding that gives you, based on your training, that gives you a more accurate picture of what information you are trying to obtain.
If you can answer the question, you may, sir.
What's the question again, sir?
Sure. Now, it's your understanding, based on your training, that the reason you get information right away is because it's probably going to be the most accurate as opposed to waiting a while.
I can't say accurate. I can say needed.
I'm sorry, you can say what, sir?
It's needed to further investigate. I hope it's accurate.
Officer James,
Yes, sir.
you're aware that as time goes by, people's memories fade.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're also aware that as time I'm sorry, I didn't know there was an objection.
There was an objection, it was already answered, the answer may stand. Do you have any further questions?
Yes, sir. You're also aware that as time goes by, witnesses can speak with other witnesses.
Yes, sir.
And that's not what you want.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So going back to my original question, the reason to get as much detail as possible is to speak to them early on, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, it's also important to document any immediate interviews, right?
Yes, sir.
That's why you write a report,
Yes, sir.
and that's why we want to make sure we don't forget things like in your previous report.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it's important when you interview a witness to record the conversations, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You didn't record this conversation with Mr. Freer.
What conversation?
When you spoke with Mr. Freer that evening at the hospital.
It's right here in the report, sir.
You recorded that conversation?
Record?
tape
No,
recorder?
no. Negative.
Okay. So, the specifics of that conversation, fresh at the hospital, was never recorded by you, sir.
Can we back up on the record part?
I will in just a moment, but answer my question.
No, it wasn't recorded.
Okay. And are you aware if the detectives who showed up later recorded Mr. Freer?
I have no knowledge of that, sir.
Okay. And is that the reason why you didn't record it? Because you expected the detectives to do it?
Well, I don't record, sir. I think I misunderstood your question.
When you say, you understood my question to be that documenting it?
Writing, yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right. But my question to you now, sir, is did you expect or do you believe that it was the detective's job to record Mr. Freer's conversation?
I don't know how they do their job, sir.
You have no idea?
No, sir.
Okay. When you spoke with Mr. Freer, he could not give you any information as to who the potential shooter was.
I'll see you at sidebar.
What the person or people looked like that shot at the BMW.
Yes, sir.
I don't have any further questions. No further questions.
Okay. How long will your redirect be?
1 minute.
We'll see.
Officer James, you were asked some questions about how you had gone by, and I think you said you went by the scene prior. Was it a scene yet? Had the shooting happened yet when you went to the intersection?
There was no scene, sir.
And in fact, did that get a different incident number? Was that a completely separate incident?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, have you heard yourself on the turret saying, oh, I was just by there once you heard the radio call for the shooting?
Yes, sir.
So that was earlier, correct?
Yes, sir.
And just relative to Mr. Freer telling you something that Mr. Baez asked you about, did Mr. Freer tell you about 2 other people in the car who had fled? Or did he tell you there were 2 other people in the car?
Yes, sir.
And did you forward that information?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, officer. No further questions.
All right. Nothing further? Thank you, sir. You may step down. Please watch your step. And ladies and gentlemen, we will take a morning recess. You have some refreshment. We will batten down the hatches here in the courtroom such that no one gets sucked out during the remainder of the day. Jurors may be excused.
All right, please.